Ethan Walker arrived at his grandfather's old mountain cabin just as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the narrow path that led to the place he had always considered a refuge. The air smelled of pine and cold stone, the kind of scent that made him feel like he had stepped back into a quieter, older world. As he crossed the concrete bridge that stretched over the rocky creek below, he felt a sense of ownership and responsibility. The bridge was legally his, passed down through generations. It wasn't just a structure of stone and steel, it was the lifeline of the entire remote community. He parked his truck beside the cabin, listening to the familiar creak of the old wooden steps as he walked up to the porch. Inside, dust floated lazily in thin beams of evening light. After cleaning up and getting the fireplace going, he headed to the community meeting scheduled for that night, something he hadn't attended in months. He expected updates about road repairs or seasonal fire safety. What he didn't expect was the tone of control that greeted him. Mara Bennett, the stern-faced president of the HOA, stood at the front of the lodge hall with a stack of documents. She announced a new set of regulations regarding property access, maintenance fines, and safety-related closures. Ethan's brows furrowed when she mentioned sealing gates for non-compliant owners. Her voice carried authority, but beneath it he sensed something else, something like ambition disguised as community concern. The other cabin owners murmured among themselves, some nodding obediently while others looked uneasy. Ethan remained silent, watching Mara carefully, trying to decipher her motive behind these sudden changes. A cold feeling crawled into his chest, an instinctive warning that something bigger was unfolding around him. Ethan woke early the next morning, hoping the unease from the meeting had only been in his mind. But the moment he drove down the dirt path leading to his cabin's entrance, his stomach dropped. A new steel barrier, welded shut and painted with bright warning stripes, stood across his gate like a mocking symbol of control. A fresh HOA notice was bolted to it, stating that his non-compliance required temporary restriction of property access. Ethan stepped out of his truck, anger simmering as he ran his hand along the cold metal. There had been no warning, no violation notice, nothing, just sudden enforcement. He tried calling the HOA office, but no one answered. Finally, he drove to Mara Bennett's house, where she opened the door with a practiced expression of polite annoyance. When he demanded an explanation, she simply folded her arms and said the decision was final until he met unspecified requirements. Her tone made it clear that the requirements were whatever she decided they were. Ethan pushed back, telling her she had no authority to block his personal property, but she countered by citing obscure bylaw numbers, many of which he had never seen. As he walked away, other neighbors watched from their porches. Some avoided eye contact, afraid to get involved. But one didn't, Jennifer Jen Lane, the newcomer who had moved in just a few weeks earlier. She approached Ethan cautiously, telling him she had received her own warning letter and believed the HOA was pushing boundaries far beyond legality. Her voice carried genuine concern, not fear. Ethan felt an unexpected solidarity forming between them. It was the first moment he realized the HOA's power play wasn't just about him. This was the beginning of something larger, something calculated, and if he didn't act soon, the situation could escalate beyond a sealed gate. Ethan spent the next morning on the cabin porch, scrolling through old files and documents his grandfather had left behind. He needed answers, especially after the shock of discovering his own gate sealed shut. The more he looked, the more he realized how deeply the bridge ownership tied into the entire community's access. The deed wasn't just a dusty paper tucked in a file, it was a legal anchor granting him control of the only crossing point leading into the valley. With rising unease, he called his longtime friend Tom Reyes, a lawyer known for cutting through complicated property disputes. After listening carefully, Tom asked him to send photos of the documents immediately. Minutes later, Tom called back with tension in his voice, confirming that Ethan held full ownership and that the HOA had no authority to restrict his movement in or out. Ethan felt a mixture of relief and anger. He walked to the sealed gate, taking pictures and recording a video to document everything. Jen appeared moments later, holding a stack of HOA notices she had been collecting. She admitted she had spoken to several other owners who felt pressured by Mara's tactics but were too afraid of retaliation to speak openly. Ethan listened as she described how Mara had recently changed meeting rules, introduced new fees, and issued warnings almost weekly. It was becoming clear that the HOA president was building her own version of control, one step at a time. Together, Ethan and Jen drove to speak with other residents. Some whispered anxiously, others shut their doors quickly, but a few expressed frustration at the sudden shifts in HOA power. Every conversation strengthened Ethan's conviction that this was no misunderstanding. He shared what Tom had told him, watching hope flicker in the eyes of neighbors who had felt powerless for months. Ethan spent the next several days preparing for the community meeting he had called, gathering documents, recording videos, and printing copies of the bridge deed that clearly listed him as the sole owner. Word of the upcoming confrontation spread quickly through the valley, creating a tense atmosphere that settled over every cabin. Some residents seemed eager for answers, while others avoided Ethan entirely, fearful of being seen choosing a side. Jen stood by him throughout, helping organize the evidence and encouraging neighbors to attend so no one could claim ignorance afterward. When evening arrived, the lodge hall buzzed with nervous energy. Mara Bennett stood at the front, shoulders square, expression unreadable as if she had already prepared her counterattack. Ethan entered with a quiet determination, carrying a folder thick with documents. After a brief introduction, he stepped forward and began speaking with a calm, controlled voice. He explained how the gate to his property had been sealed without notice and how that action had violated not only common courtesy but also multiple property laws. Mara interrupted, insisting he was exaggerating, but Ethan raised a hand and laid the bridge deed on the table for everyone to see. Gasps scattered through the room as residents leaned in. Ethan explained how the bridge was private property, legally separate from the HOA, and how Mara's actions effectively attempted to control access by restricting him while relying on his privately owned structure for community entry. Mara's confident mask slipped for the first time, replaced by visible irritation. She attempted to defend herself by claiming authority under new bylaws, but Ethan countered by showing they had been passed without proper notice or quorum. The room erupted into arguments, neighbors shouting over one another as fear, frustration, and long-suppressed concerns flooded to the surface. Avery drove back into the neighborhood with a knot lodged deep in her stomach. The vacation had cleared her mind, but the tension waiting for her felt heavier than when she'd left. Maya met her in the driveway before she even stepped out of the car, handing her a small folder of printed screenshots, photos, and notes, everything she had documented while Avery was away. Her gratitude was immediate. Maya's loyalty felt like an anchor in a storm that kept shifting directions. The HOA meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. Avery barely had time to unpack before heading to the community hall, where the board sat at a long table, and several curious neighbors lingered nearby, pretending not to eavesdrop. Karen was already there, sitting stiffly with her arms folded, her expression a blend of self-righteousness and anticipation. She didn't greet Avery. She didn't even look at her. The meeting began with the board asking each woman to explain her side. Karen launched into a dramatic retelling, claiming Avery had been aggressive, unreasonable, and determined to isolate herself from the community. She portrayed herself as the victim, insisting she'd only needed the garage briefly and had been humiliated by being locked out. Avery listened without interrupting, though each exaggeration twisted painfully in her chest. When it was her turn, she spoke calmly, laying out the facts. Karen parked without permission, ignored boundaries, issued veiled threats, and spread misinformation. She handed the board the folder Maya had prepared. Photographs of the SUV. Screenshots of Karen's comments. Copies of the voicemail. The room became quieter with each page turned. Karen's confidence faltered. Her arms uncrossed. Her eyes darted. In the end, the board sided firmly with Avery. They ruled that the garage was private property, that Karen had violated HOA conduct guidelines, and that she was prohibited from using Avery's space without explicit written permission. They issued her a